The obsidian spire, the heart of the Cathar Imperium, pierced the perpetual twilight of the capital world, a monument of bioluminescent crystal and polished, gravity-defying stone. Within its highest chamber, the Concordat Council convened, their forms arrayed in a great circle around a swirling nebula of holographic light. The air was thick with the scent of ionized air and ancient dust, a fragrance of power held for millennia. Silence, a rare and heavy commodity in this hall of eternal debate, pressed down upon them all. It was High Lord Valerius who finally fractured it, his voice a low resonance that seemed to emanate from the very stone of his throne. He was a creature of immense size and regal bearing, his carapace a mosaic of polished obsidian plates, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the star charts that danced in the chamber's core. "The reports remain unchanged," he intoned, the words carrying the weight of an empire that had not faced a true unknown in 1,000 cycles. "The Silent Fleet holds its position at the edge of the veiled nebula. No transmissions, no energy signatures consistent with active propulsion. They simply are." His gaze swept across the assembled lords, each a ruler of a star system, a viceroy of a subjugated species, or a high-ranking member of the Cathar military and clerical castes. He saw the familiar tapestry of ambition, fear, and thinly veiled contempt that constituted the fabric of his court. General Corinth, his massive frame straining against the confines of his ceremonial armor, shifted, the sound of metal on stone a sharp, aggressive punctuation in the oppressive quiet. "Unchanged is unacceptable, High Lord." Corinth's voice was a gravelly rasp, forged in the fires of a dozen pacification campaigns. "They are a blade poised at the throat of the Imperium. Their presence is an act of war. To allow it to continue unanswered is a projection of weakness. It invites challenge." "A blade must be wielded by a hand," countered Xylos the loremaster. His form was ancient, his carapace scarred and faded, his movements slow and deliberate. He sat apart from the others, surrounded by floating dataglyphs that pulsed with the soft light of forgotten histories. "We do not know the hand that guides these constructs. To strike blindly is to invite a response we cannot predict. We are an empire of order general, not a swarm of reactive primitives." The central hologram shifted, resolving into a stark, three-dimensional rendering of the objects in question. They were titanic, impossibly so. Each vessel was a monolith of smooth, dark material that seemed to drink the light of the nearby stars. Their design was a profound violation of known engineering principles, a fusion of brutalist geometry and organic flowing lines that seemed to mock the rigid functional aesthetics of the Cathar fleet. There were no visible weapon ports, no sensor arrays, no engine housings. They were perfect, featureless voids against the tapestry of space, their scale so vast that the Concordat's mightiest dreadnoughts would be little more than gnats beside them. "Primitives," Corinth scoffed, a deep rumble of disdain in his chest. "We know who they are. The energy profile of their arrival, though masked, bears the chaotic, inefficient signature of nascent dimensional folding, a technology only one species has been foolish enough to pursue with such reckless abandon. Humans." The name hung in the air, heavy with disgust and dismissal. Humanity. The noisy, fractious, emotionally incontinent mammals from the Sol system. The Concordat had watched them for centuries, a remote sociological curiosity. They were a species that had clawed its way to the stars on a ladder of self-inflicted violence and chaotic innovation. Their expansion had been messy, a sprawling, uncontrolled bloom of colonies and factions, their politics a cacophony of competing ideologies. They were considered clever, in a brutish, haphazard way, but fundamentally unstable. A species that still revered individuality over the collective, that celebrated its emotional outbursts in art and song, could never be a true galactic power. They were an annoyance, a potential contagion of disorder, but never a strategic threat. "The humans do not possess the capacity to construct such vessels," Xylos stated, his voice calm and certain. The dataglyphs around him swirled, projecting ancient texts and sensor readings from distant listening posts. "Their largest ships are crude, asymmetrical things, bristling with exposed weaponry and inefficient shielding. They are built for war, not for this. This is something else. This is architecture, not engineering. It is a statement." "It is a threat." Corinth slammed a mailed fist onto the armrest of his seat. "Loremaster, your reverence for ambiguity will be the doom of us all. The humans are deceptive. Their chaos is a cloak for their ambition. They have hidden their true strength. They have built this fleet in secret in the dark spaces between systems, and now they reveal it to challenge our dominion. They mock our perceived omniscience. They test our resolve." High Lord Valerius held up a hand, and the chamber fell silent once more. His multifaceted eyes studied the holographic ships, turning them over and over in the simulated void. He felt the cold touch of uncertainty, a sensation he had not experienced since his ascension. The Imperium was built on certainty. The Cathar understood the laws of the universe, the politics of power, the calculus of fear and obedience. They had charted the stars, subjugated lesser races, and brought a rigid, unyielding order to their quadrant of the galaxy. This did not compute. Corinth's argument, though born of aggression, had a certain brutal logic. It was the simplest explanation. The humans, underestimated and dismissed, had somehow achieved a monumental technological leap. It was a humiliating prospect, a failure of imperial intelligence on a scale unseen for generations. But it was a known quantity. A war with humanity, however costly, was a familiar problem. They could be crushed, their worlds pacified, their chaotic spirit broken and remade in the Cathar image. Xylos's caution, however, resonated with a deeper, more primal part of him. The ships did not feel human. They felt old, ancient. The silence they projected was not the silence of a fleet waiting for orders, but the silence of a tomb, a monument. He thought of the pre-Cathar legends, the whispers of civilizations that had risen and fallen in the cosmic dawn, leaving behind only inscrutable artifacts and warnings that no one could decipher. "Your counsel is noted, General," Valerius said, his gaze still fixed on the hologram. "And your wisdom is appreciated, Loremaster. You both speak a part of the truth. There is a threat and there is a mystery. They may be one and the same. We will not act with haste, but we will not remain idle." He turned his attention to the Minister of Intelligence, a slender, shrouded figure who had remained motionless throughout the debate. "What is the status of the human diplomatic channels?" The minister stirred, her voice a soft, sibilant whisper. "They are broadcasting on all standard frequencies, High Lord, a message of confusion. They claim the fleet is unknown to them. They are asking us and every other power in this sector if we have any information. They seem frightened." Corinth let out a harsh, guttural laugh. "A clever ruse. They feign ignorance and fear to lull us into complacency. They probe our reactions. It is precisely the kind of disingenuous, emotionally manipulative tactic we would expect from them." "Or," Xylos murmured almost to himself, "it is the truth." The debate raged for hours, a cyclical storm of accusation, strategy, and philosophical inquiry. The Cathar mind, so adept at imposing order on the universe, struggled to impose it upon this singular, terrifying anomaly. They dissected human psychology, projecting their own values of dominance and territoriality onto a species they barely understood. They saw the humans' rapid, chaotic expansion not as a desperate search for resources and living space, but as a precursor to inevitable conflict, a mimicry of their own imperial history. Every fragment of data was twisted to fit the narrative of a clandestine human threat. Their art was analyzed for signs of warlike ambition, their history for evidence of grand, deceptive strategies. They saw the faces of conquerors staring back at them from the mirror of their own assumptions. Meanwhile, the silent fleet waited. It did not move. It did not communicate. It simply existed, a colossal, silent rebuke to the Cathar's mastery of the cosmos. Its presence began to ripple through the Imperium. Trillions of citizens, from the core worlds to the subjugated client traces on the fringe, heard the news. Whispers turned to rumors, rumors to panic. The unwavering stability of the Imperium, its greatest strength, began to show hairline fractures. The fleet became a symbol, to some a sign of Cathar weakness, to others a harbinger of a long-prophesied apocalypse. Valerius felt the foundations of his power trembling. He needed a resolution. He needed an enemy he could name, a threat he could face and destroy. The idea that this enemy was humanity, for all its humiliation, was becoming more comforting than the alternative. The alternative was the void, the unknown. The decision was made. A message was sent to the human diplomatic corps, a summons couched in the language of ultimatum. An envoy would be received in the obsidian spire. They would answer for the fleet at their border. They would explain their act of galactic intimidation. The might of the Cathar Imperium would be brought to bear, not with warships, but with the crushing weight of political interrogation. They would force the truth from these upstarts, and then they would decide their fate. The council. Chamber emptied, the lords returning to their duties, leaving Valerius alone with Xylos and the silent, swirling hologram. "You believe we are making a mistake," Valerius stated, his voice devoid of its earlier command. It was the quiet query of one old creature to another. Xylos did not look at him. His ancient eyes were fixed on the impossible ships. "I believe we are asking the wrong questions," the loremaster replied softly. "We are so concerned with who built them that we have not stopped to ask *why. A creation of this scale is not a weapon of war. A fleet of this size is not for conquest. That is a fortress wall. That is a shield. We are staring at a shield, High Lord, and we are trying to convince ourselves that it is a sword." A single, small ship detached itself from the sprawling, chaotic orbit of the human colonial capital and accelerated into the void. It was an unimpressive vessel by Concordat standards, a diplomatic courier, sleek and functional but utterly devoid of armament. It broadcast its identity and peaceful intent on every known frequency as it crossed the border into Cathar sovereign space. It was met by a phalanx of imperial cruisers, ships like jagged shards of obsidian, their weapon ports glowing with contained energy. They dwarfed the human vessel, surrounding it, guiding it like a predator herding its prey deeper into its lair. The journey to the Cathar capital world was a silent, tense affair. The human envoy was offered no communication beyond cold, automated navigational commands. It was a calculated display of power, an unsubtle reminder of their place in the galactic hierarchy. The human ship landed in the cavernous docking bay of the obsidian spire. The airlocks hissed open, and a lone figure emerged. The waiting honor guard, a legion of 7-foot-tall Cathar warriors in polished battle armor, stood impossibly still, their presence a wall of silent intimidation. They expected a delegation, a team of specialists, perhaps even a military attaché. They did not expect one man. He was of average height for his species, dressed in a simple, dark gray suit that seemed to absorb the ambient light. His hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and his face was lined with the quiet patience of a man who had spent a lifetime in rooms where words were weapons. This was Ambassador Thorn. He carried no data slate, no ceremonial staff, no retinue. He walked with a calm, steady gait, his gaze sweeping over the imposing Cathar architecture and the intimidating honor guard not with fear, but with a quiet, analytical curiosity. His composure was, in itself, an act of defiance. It was not the posture of a representative from a guilty, cornered species. He was led through silent, cavernous halls, his footsteps echoing in the immense spaces. The walls were carved with the millennia-long history of the Cathar Imperium, great conquests, subjugated worlds, vanquished alien foes. It was a saga of unrelenting dominance, a clear and deliberate message to any visitor. Thorn observed it all with the same placid, unreadable expression. He was finally brought into the Concordat council chamber. The great lords were assembled on their thrones, arrayed in a semicircle of judgment. The central space where he was to stand was empty, isolating him under the collective, multifaceted gaze of the most powerful beings in the quadrant. The air was heavy, charged with accusation. High Lord Valerius sat on his elevated throne, a figure of immense imperial gravity. "You are Ambassador Thorn of the human systems." Valerius's voice boomed, amplified by the chamber's acoustics. It was not a question. "I am," Thorn replied. His voice was calm, clear, and unadorned. It did not tremble. It did not carry the expected undertones of supplication or fear. It was simply a statement of fact. This small act of verbal neutrality seemed to unbalance the council. They were accustomed to a spectrum of reactions from lesser species, from groveling terror to defiant bluster. This quiet, professional serenity was alien to them. "You stand before the Concordat Council of the Cathar Imperium," Valerius continued, his tone hardening. "You have been summoned to account for an unprecedented act of aggression against our sovereign territory. A fleet of warships of unknown design and overwhelming scale has taken position on our border. A fleet we have traced back to your sector of space. A fleet that broadcasts no identity but whose presence constitutes a clear and undeniable threat." General Corinth leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "Speak, human, justify this silent invasion. What is the meaning of this grand armada? Is it a prelude to war, a demand for territory, or are you simply fools brandishing a weapon whose power you cannot comprehend?" Ambassador Thorn listened patiently, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He let the silence stretch after Corinth's outburst, allowing the echoes of the accusation to fade. His gaze moved from the general to the High Lord, meeting the stare of each council member in turn. There was no defiance in his look, only a quiet, earnest gravity. "High Lord Valerius, members of the Concordat Council," he began, his voice maintaining its steady, measured cadence. "I am here to tell you that the Terran Confederacy shares your deep and profound concern. We have observed the same fleet. We have analyzed its impossible scale, its silent, passive state. And we have come to the same conclusion as you. It represents a variable of unknown and potentially catastrophic significance." He paused. "However, you have made one fundamental error in your assessment, a grave and dangerous error." A low murmur rippled through the council. Valerius silenced it with a gesture. "And what error is that, Ambassador?" Thorn's eyes met the High Lord's directly. "You believe that fleet is ours." The statement was so simple, so direct, that it stunned the chamber into absolute silence. Corinth's mandibles clicked in a gesture of disbelief, his expression a mask of contempt. "A lie," the general hissed. "A pathetic, transparent lie. Do you take us for fools? We tracked the quantum foam displacement of their arrival. It originated from the direction of your core worlds." "You tracked a disturbance, General," Thorne corrected him gently. "A wave. You assumed its point of origin was the source. But when a stone is thrown into a pond, the ripples travel far from the point of impact. These ships did not originate from our space. They passed asterisk through asterisk it." He raised a hand, and a small, almost invisible device on his wrist projected a holographic display into the air before him. It was a simple, elegant star chart, far less ornate than the Cathar's swirling nebula, but dense with information. It showed the trajectory of the silent fleet, a clean, impossibly straight line that cut through a dozen systems, human and otherwise, before coming to a halt at the veiled nebula. "These are our long-range sensor logs," Thorne explained. "Shared in real time with your own intelligence agencies the moment we confirmed the readings. We hid nothing. We have been broadcasting our confusion and our data on all open channels since the first moment of detection. We are not feigning ignorance, General. We are genuinely ignorant, and we are, as your Minister of Intelligence so accurately reported, frightened." Xylos, the old loremaster, leaned forward, his ancient eyes scrutinizing the human's projection. "Your technical data seems authentic, but authenticity can be fabricated. You are a young race, but not a foolish one. How can we be certain this is not a grand deception?" This was the crux of the matter, the moment of truth. Thorne's expression softened slightly, a flicker of something that might have been empathy. He understood their suspicion. It was logical from their perspective. He took a slow breath as if preparing to reveal a difficult, perhaps even shameful truth. "You can be certain," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate, serious tone, "because of a simple, undeniable fact, one that we do not advertise, one that is a source of some humility for our engineers and our strategists, but a fact nonetheless." He looked directly at High Lord Valerius, and the words he spoke next landed with the force of a physical blow, shattering the Cathar's entire strategic framework. "High Lord, we are horrified you could even imagine we were capable of building ships like that. We do not have the science. We do not have the material engineering. We do not have the energy production. To construct one of those vessels would require the total energy output of our home star for a century and materials that we cannot even synthesize in a laboratory. To suggest we built a fleet of them in secret is to credit us with a level of technological and logistical mastery that is, for our species, the stuff of mythology." The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the heavy, accusatory silence of a courtroom. It was the hollow, ringing silence of profound shock. The absolute, unshakable confidence in Thorne's voice, the sheer humility of his admission, was more convincing than any technical schematic. A species vying for power would never admit to such a profound weakness. A species planning a deception would boast and bluster, not confess to being centuries, perhaps millennia, behind the curve. "We have brought our complete technical archives," Thorne continued, gesturing to the data stream his projector was now emitting. "Our FTL drive specifications, our shipyard capacities, our energy generation records. You will find they are adequate, serviceable, but they are primitive compared to the science embodied in those silent monoliths. We are a species that still encases our starships in crude metal alloys. Those vessels," he gestured to the main Cathar hologram, "are not made of matter as we understand it. They are shaped spacetime. They are monuments to a level of science we can only dream of." High Lord Valerius stared at the human, then at the holographic ships, then back at the human. He felt the foundations of his reality cracking. The entire premise of their crisis, the central pillar of their fear and their strategy, had been built on a lie they had told themselves. They had seen an unknown power and, in their arrogance, had chosen the most familiar, most dismissible culprit. They had not wanted to face the possibility that something truly new, something truly alien had entered their galaxy. Xylos was the first to speak, his voice a dry whisper. "He speaks the truth. The energy signatures, the material composition, we saw the anomalies, but we dismissed them. We forced the data to fit our preconceived narrative. We have been blind." General Corinth was on his feet, his massive form radiating fury and confusion. "Impossible. It is a trick. A novel form of psychological warfare. They play on our logic, our desire for evidence. They present their weakness as a shield." "What would be the purpose of such a trick, General?" Thorne asked, his tone still maddeningly calm. "To what end would we orchestrate this? To reveal a fleet of incomprehensible power only to then deny its ownership? It would be the act of a madman. It would achieve nothing but universal suspicion and our own immediate destruction." "My people are many things, General, often chaotic, frequently emotional, sometimes illogical. but we are not collectively insane. Thorne's logic was a cold, clear light cutting through the fog of Cathar prejudice. He wasn't just defending humanity. He was calmly, rationally deconstructing the Cathar's flawed reasoning, holding a mirror up to their own intellectual arrogance. The great reveal was not of a hidden human superweapon, but of a hidden Cathar intellectual vulnerability, their inability to conceive of a problem that wasn't centered on themselves and their known rivals. Valerius felt a cold dread seep into his being, a fear far deeper and more primal than the threat of a human war. A war with humanity was a problem with a solution. But this, if the humans did not build that fleet, then who did? And as Xylos had so presciently asked, why? He looked at Ambassador Thorne, at this small, soft-skinned mammal standing unbowed in the heart of his empire, and for the first time he did not see a primitive upstart. He saw a peer, a fellow sentient being staring into the same abyss. "You are suggesting," Valerius said slowly, the words feeling alien in his own mouth, "that we are facing a third party, an unknown power whose capabilities dwarf both of our civilizations." "That is precisely what I am suggesting," Thorne affirmed with a solemn nod. "We did not come here to answer an accusation, High Lord. We came here to share a warning. We came here to our most powerful and most ancient neighbor to ask for help. Because whatever built those ships is now on our shared doorstep, and we are not prepared to face it alone." The confession hung in the chamber, an offering of vulnerability that was, in its own way, a display of profound strength. Humanity, the chaotic upstarts, had been the first to admit their own inadequacy in the face of the unknown. They had been the first to set aside pride in favor of reason, and in doing so they had proven themselves to be more mature, more rational, and perhaps more worthy of survival than the ancient, prideful empire that now sat in stunned silence before them. The balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted, not with the firing of a weapon, but with the quiet admission of a simple, terrifying truth. The days that followed were a crucible of transformation for the Cathar Imperium. The Concordat Council convened not in judgment, but in grim collaboration. Human scientists and strategists were invited, not as supplicants, but as partners. They worked alongside Cathar researchers in the deepest levels of the Obsidian Spire, their combined knowledge directed at the silent, enigmatic fleet. The cultural friction was immense. The Cathar, with their rigid methodologies and millennia of established doctrine, were initially frustrated by the human approach, a chaotic, intuitive blend of rapid hypothesis, iterative testing, and a willingness to discard cherished theories in the face of new data. The humans, in turn, struggled with the Cathar's hierarchical structure and their deep-seated reluctance to admit uncertainty. Yet out of this friction, a new understanding was forged. The Cathar began to respect the humans' intellectual agility and their profound capacity for abstract thought. The humans learned to appreciate the depth of Cathar knowledge and the stability that their ordered society provided. General Corinth, humbled and sidelined, watched in grudging silence as human tacticians pointed out strategic blind spots in the Imperial fleet's deployment that had existed for cent. Ares unnoticed. Loremaster Xylos spent hours in deep conversation with human historians and philosophers, finding in their turbulent, violent history a terrifying resilience, a capacity to endure and adapt that the Cathar, in their long, placid reign, had never been forced to develop. High Lord Valerius and Ambassador Thorne met daily. Their conversations were no longer the tense confrontations of potential enemies, but the somber discussions of two leaders burdened by the same cosmic weight. Valerius found himself speaking with a candor he had never afforded even his own council. He spoke of the pressures of empire, the fear of stagnation, the spiritual emptiness that had begun to creep into his long-lived people. "We have mastered our environment, our genetics, our quadrant of space," Valerius confessed one cycle, as they stood before a holographic representation of the silent fleet. "We have eliminated chaos, but in doing so, I fear we have also eliminated purpose. We exist to maintain what is. We have forgotten how to strive for what could be." "My people have the opposite problem," Thorne replied, his gaze distant. "We are defined by our striving. We are never content. We reach for a star, and the moment we grasp it, we are already looking at the next galaxy. It is our greatest strength and our most profound curse. We have created wonders, but we have also inflicted unspeakable horrors upon ourselves and our world. We are a paradox. A species of profound empathy and breathtaking cruelty all at once. It was in this exchange of vulnerabilities that the true alliance was cemented. It was not a treaty signed on parchment or data slate, but a shared recognition of their mutual incompleteness. The Cathar had order without dynamism. The humans had dynamism without order. Separately, they were flawed, perhaps doomed. Together, they represented something more, a potential synthesis of stability and innovation, of wisdom and aspiration. The decision was made to approach the Silent Fleet. A joint expedition was formed, composed of the finest vessels of the Cathar Imperium and the most advanced scientific ships of the Terran Confederacy. The Cathar cruisers, all sharp angles and brutal functionality, flew in a precise, disciplined formation. The human ships, a collection of varied designs and philosophies, moved with a more fluid, adaptive grace. It was a fleet of contrasts, a physical manifestation of the new alliance, moving as one toward the great unknown. As they drew closer, the sheer, mind-breaking scale of the silent vessels became terrifyingly apparent. They did not reflect light so much as annihilate it, creating holes in the starfield. Their surfaces were smoother than any known material, without a single mar, seam, or imperfection across kilometers of hull. The combined sensor arrays of the joint fleet, far more powerful than either could have managed alone, began to probe the monoliths in earnest. The initial returns were baffling. The ships were cold, dead cold, near absolute zero. There was no power signature, no radiation, no drive field. They were inert. Scans of their internal structures revealed nothing. They were solid. There were no corridors, no crew quarters, no engine rooms, just solid, undifferentiated exotic matter from hull to hull. The disbelief on the bridge of the Cathar flagship, the Will of Ages asterisk, was palpable. "Solid," General Corinth, relegated to an observational role, bellowed. "It is a deception, a projection, a trick of light and gravity." But the human chief scientist, a woman named Dr. Aris Thorne, a distant relative of the ambassador, shook her head, her eyes wide with a terrifying awe. "No, General, the mass readings are correct. They aren't hollow, they aren't ships." "Then what are they?" Valerius demanded, his voice tight with strain. "We don't know," Aris admitted, her voice a whisper. "They're just solid objects, sculptures, messages maybe, but the energy required to arrange matter this densely, it's not astrophysical. It's cosmological. This is the kind of engineering you'd use to build a universe, not a boat." It was then that a junior Cathar sensor technician, his voice trembling, pointed to a new reading. "High Lord, there is a fluctuation, a single point of variance on the largest of the objects. It is an opening." The fleet reoriented, focusing all sensors on the designated point. A section of the largest vessel's hull, a section so vast it could have swallowed the Cathar capital city whole, was shimmering. It wasn't opening like a door. The matter itself was becoming transparent, its quantum state shifting to allow energy and probes to pass through. Inside, deep within the solid shell, a chamber was revealed. And in the center of that chamber, held in a perfect, inviolable sphere of suspended time, was a single immense object. It was not a machine. It was not a life form. It was an artifact of impossible beauty and complexity, a crystalline structure that seemed to fold in on itself through dimensions the observers could not perceive. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, and as the fleet's most powerful spectrographs analyzed it, a wave of pure, unadulterated awe swept through every bridge, Cathar and human alike. "It's a data storage device," Aris Thorne breathed, tears welling in her eyes. "But it's not storing information in binary or quantum states. It's using the fundamental constants of the universe as its code. The speed of light, the gravitational constant, Planck's constant, they are the letters of its alphabet, the entire structure, it's a map, a key." The joint command worked in a feverish, unified trance. The Cathar's massive processing power and the human's intuitive leaps of logic combined to slowly, painstakingly begin to decipher the artifact's purpose. It was not a weapon. It was not a tool. It was a library, a primer. It contained the complete, unabridged laws of physics, from the macro to the quantum, including principles and forces that were utterly unknown to both species. It described how to manipulate space-time, how to generate limitless energy from the vacuum, how to transcend the material form. It was a complete instruction manual for ascension, a guide to becoming gods. The revelation was so profound, so universe-altering, that it rendered all previous politics, all notions of empire and territory, utterly meaningless. Valerius stared at the data stream, at the elegant, terrifying equations flowing across his screen, and felt the weight of his 10,000-year-old civilization shrink to the insignificance of a single grain of sand on an infinite beach. They had been fighting for control of a puddle, while an ocean lay just beyond their sight. But as the final layers of the message were being unlocked, a new section of the artifact began to glow, this one with a harsh, urgent red light. It was separate from the grand scientific revelation. It was simpler, more direct. It was not written in the language of physics, but in a symbolic script that was designed to be universally understood through pure mathematical logic. It was a warning. Ambassador Thorne stood beside High Lord Valerius on the bridge of the asterisk Will of Ages as the final translation solidified on the main screen. The silence was absolute, the only sound the soft hum of the life support systems and the frantic beating of their own hearts. The message, etched in stark, universal symbols at the base of the divine instruction manual, contained only 10 words. It is coming. Learn, ascend, or be consumed. The words hung in the void, a final, chilling twist that recontextualized everything. The silent fleet was not a weapon. It was a gift, a desperate, final gift. The monoliths were not ships, they were textbooks left behind by a civilization that had faced an existential threat and had chosen to pass on their knowledge before they were extinguished. They were a shield, just as Xylos had suspected, but not a physical one. They were a shield of knowledge, an ark of wisdom sent out into the void in the hope that anyone would find it in time. They were not the first. They were simply the next. Valerius looked away from the screen, his ancient, multifaceted eyes finding the calm, steady gaze of Ambassador Thorn. The human was not panicked. He was not triumphant. His face was a mask of somber, resolute understanding. In that moment, the Cathar High Lord saw the true nature of humanity, the quality that had allowed them to survive their own brutal history and reach for the stars. It was not aggression. It was not cunning. It was an unshakable, almost insane courage in the face of the incomprehensible. It was the ability to stand on the edge of an abyss, to stare into a darkness that promised utter annihilation, and to think not of conquest or dominion, but of understanding, of unity, and of the future. The Galactic Empire was not horrified that humans weren't capable of ships like that. They were horrified by the sudden, brutal realization of what was. The universe was infinitely larger, older, and more terrifying than they had ever imagined. And their only hope for survival now lay in an alliance with the one species they had so thoroughly, so disastrously underestimated. The age of the Cathar Imperium was over. The age of a united galaxy, a desperate, fledgling alliance against the coming dark, had just begun.